Today, billions of people believe in something they cannot see. They pray to invisible beings. They build enormous buildings for them. They light candles, burn incense, make offerings, follow rituals, and sometimes even change their entire lives because of them. But none of that answers the strangest question. When did a human being first look at the world and think, something is behind all of this? There were no churches, no scriptures, no priests, no word for religion. Just a human being standing beneath a terrifying sky. So, why did ancient humans start believing in gods? Imagine the world tens of thousands of years ago. A storm rolls across the horizon. Lightning tears through the sky. Someone you love suddenly dies. A child becomes sick. The sun disappears every night and somehow returns every morning. Then, while everyone is asleep, you dream about a dead relative, and in the dream they look directly at you. For us, these events have explanations. Weather has physics, disease has biology, dreams have neuroscience. But humans didn't always have those explanations. And here's the important part. Not understanding something does not automatically create a god. A mystery is just a mystery. So something else had to happen. Archaeologists cannot dig up a fossil of someone's belief. There is no ancient skeleton with a note attached saying, "I believed in the afterlife." Instead, researchers have to look for behavior. And one of the most powerful clues is what humans did with their dead. At Panga Yasaidi in Kenya, archaeologists found the burial of a child, about 78,000 years old. The body had been deliberately placed in a prepared pit and remained remarkably well preserved in its original position. It is currently considered the oldest known deliberate human burial in Africa. That's important, because the people who buried this child didn't simply leave the body where it fell. They dug. They placed the body. They covered it. They did something deliberate. But does that prove they believed in gods? No. And this is where the story gets interesting. A burial can mean many things. Maybe it was practical. Maybe the body needed to be moved away from the living area. Maybe people wanted to prevent animals from disturbing it. Maybe they were grieving. Maybe they believed something happened after death. Archaeology can sometimes tell us what humans did. It is much worse at telling us what they were thinking while they did it. And that's a problem when you're trying to find the origin of religion. There is also evidence that some Neanderthals deliberately buried their dead. At La Forassie in France, researchers found evidence supporting the intentional burial of a Neanderthal child roughly 41,000 years ago. But even here, evidence for burial does not automatically tell us what Neanderthals believed about death. So we're left with a much harder question. What kind of mind starts imagining invisible forces in the first place? Our brains are extraordinarily good at finding patterns. Sometimes that ability saves your life. You hear a branch snap in the darkness. You don't stop and calculate the probability that the branch was moved by wind. You think, something is there. That instinct is useful, because falsely assuming something dangerous is nearby can be cheaper than failing to notice a real predator. But the same brain that detects an unseen predator can also detect an unseen agent. Something caused the thunder. Something caused the river to flood. Something caused the child to become sick. Something must have made the sun disappear. And once humans became capable of imagining invisible agents, the natural world could become populated with them. The storm wasn't simply weather. Perhaps something was angry. The river wasn't merely a river. Perhaps something lived inside it. The dead person wasn't simply gone. Perhaps they had gone somewhere else. We can't point to one moment when this happened, but the ingredients for supernatural thinking are very old. And then the evidence gets stranger. Across prehistoric societies, the treatment of the dead becomes increasingly elaborate. People sometimes buried bodies carefully. Some were buried with objects. Others were associated with ochre or other pigments. Later prehistoric communities created more complex ritual spaces and repeatedly returned to particular places for communal activities. But again, we have to be careful. A red pigment beside a skeleton does not come with a translation saying, "This represents the journey to the afterlife." A grave good doesn't automatically mean someone believed in heaven. Archaeology gives us clues. It doesn't give us subtitles. Still, the repeated appearance of symbolic and ritual behaviour suggests something profound. Humans were not simply reacting to death biologically, they were interpreting it. And once death becomes something that needs an explanation, the idea that consciousness might continue becomes a powerful possibility. At some point, humans began doing something extraordinary. They didn't just experience the world, they began constructing invisible worlds to explain it. Ancestors, spirits, supernatural forces, eventually, gods. And the most important word here is eventually. Religion probably wasn't invented on a Tuesday afternoon. There was no prehistoric committee that gathered around a fire and said, "Gentlemen, I have an idea. What if there are gods?" The evidence instead points toward a much longer development of symbolic behaviour, ritual, social traditions, and changing ideas about the unseen world. By the time we reach later prehistoric and early agricultural societies, ritual activity can become enormously elaborate. At early Neolithic sites in Southwest Asia, archaeologists have found evidence of communal feasting and ritual activity that involved substantial effort and long-distance movement of animals. That tells us something important. Belief was no longer merely something happening inside one person's head. It could organize groups of people. Imagine 20 people in a dangerous world. They all face storms, drought, disease, death, hunger, uncertainty. Now imagine that they share the same story about what these things mean. The storm has a purpose. The ancestors are watching. The group has obligations. Certain places are sacred. Certain actions are forbidden. Suddenly, dozens of individual fears and experiences can be woven into one shared system. And shared systems are powerful. They can create identity. They can reinforce cooperation. They can explain suffering. They can make death less terrifying. And, eventually, they can also support political power. There is archaeological and anthropological evidence that ritual, sacrifice, and religious institutions could become deeply connected with social hierarchy in early complex societies. One cross-cultural study, for example, found evidence consistent with ritual sacrifice helping stabilize social stratification in some societies. That does not mean religion was invented simply to control people. It means religion could become intertwined with power once complex societies developed. But here's the twist. Religion wasn't necessarily created for society. It may have helped society because humans were already searching for meaning. So, who was the first human to believe in a god? We don't know, and we probably never will. There was no first theologian, no first sermon, no preserved voice saying, "Today I have invented religion." The earliest stages probably disappeared thousands of generations ago. And that's because thoughts don't fossilize. What survives are traces, burials, pigments, objects, changed landscapes, ritual spaces, repeated behaviours. And from those traces, we build the most reasonable explanation we can. That means the origin of religion may never have been a single invention. It may have been a gradual transformation. First, something caused this. Then, something is behind this. Then, something can hear us. And eventually, something expects something from us. And perhaps the strangest part is this. The human tendency to search for invisible causes did not disappear when science arrived. We still search for meaning. We still ask why something happened. We still tell stories about events we don't fully understand. We still gather together when someone dies. We still create rituals around birth, marriage, and death. The explanations have changed enormously, but the underlying human problem remains. We are conscious creatures, living in a world we did not create, and we want to know what it all means. Maybe the first gods were never really about the sky. Maybe they were about uncertainty, about death, about fear, about hope, about the terrifying realization that the world keeps happening, whether or not we understand it. An ancient human standing beneath a storm could not measure atmospheric pressure, but they could feel the danger. A person holding the body of someone they loved could not explain consciousness, but they could feel the absence. And when humans encountered things too large, frightening, or mysterious to control, they did what humans are exceptionally good at. They tried to make a story. So did ancient humans suddenly invent gods? Probably not. The evidence suggests something much stranger. Humans may have gradually built gods out of the things they could not see, control, or explain. And perhaps that's why the question still matters. Because thousands of years later, we are still the same kind of creature. We still look at the unknown and ask, what's behind it? Maybe the first human who looked up at the night sky wasn't asking how the stars worked. Maybe they were asking who put them there. And that leads to an even stranger question. If humans eventually created gods, when did humans start believing that their kings were chosen by them?